To quote the great Bending Rodriguez and Jeremy Clarkson, we're back. So sorry for the delay. For those of you following along, I had a lot to deal with leaving Italy and moving here to Poland, which is now where I'm recording to you from, in front of my voluminous bookcase. So, as you can imagine, it's difficult to come up with ideas on what to talk about these things. There's a million people speaking about, a trillion different things. So, thankfully, I recently had a date with two young women, and they inspired me to talk to you about something today. That one was a lawyer, one was a psychologist, and the lawyer asked me a question of how do I come up with new ideas for research? As some of you know, if you don't know, you can check my website, of course. I have several publications, and these come from ideas where I have to think about, what new study can I do? And so the question was, where do I come up with my new ideas? And I gave some really crappy answer, and that was because she put me on the spot. And unfortunately, because I have a little bit of OCD, I guess, I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I wanted to say something more meaningful than what I said to her, and so perhaps she'll hear a better answer than I gave her that night, along with some of you, because I think a lot of academics, both professors, senior professors, junior professors, postdocs, PhD students, master students, they really struggle with this idea of how do you generate a new topic, a new thought, a new avenue of research. Indeed, I think that might even be one of the obstacles for a lot of undergraduates coming into being a researcher in, say, psychology as opposed to something else, because it seems like such a daunting task to say something new, to make a mark, to not waste their time, to not bore bore professors and all these kinds of things. Indeed, to not look dumb is probably a big one. Imposter syndrome is common in academics. So I've come up with 10 different things that we can use to talk about ways of generating new ideas. And I have a list right here. So I'm going to grab that list for you because I can't read it from here without my glasses. So here's this little list I wrote for you here, and I'm going to go through each of them. No particular order, okay? Although, of course, I think the best ones are first because I came up with those quickly, and they have some cute phrasing to them, and they'll help you remember. So the first two are tied, but the first one is give an old look to new things, right? So an old look to new things, by that I mean take something that appears to be new, a new phenomenon, and show how old ideas, old theories apply. You might go and read a book about economics and then try to use economic principles to understand, let's say, mate preferences or something like that, right? So by doing so, you ground this what appears to be new as, no, it's just something we already know. It's like the emperor is dressed up in new clothes or something, right? Oftentimes, the old things that look new to us are really just old things that we haven't seen just quite right. We haven't seen in a way that says to us, oh, look, we understand this already. So we did this with cyber stalking, for example. So cyber stalking seems like something newish at least. And we said, okay, well, wait. Cyber stalking seems like a system that allows people to gather information about potential romantic partners, right? And it turns out that predictions align with this kind of, let's call it, evolutionary model of cyberstalking. And up until this point, most work on cyberstalking was almost exclusively just this kind of descriptive, like, look at how people who are psychopaths do this, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so number two, the related one, of course, is to give a new look to old things. So around the time I was born, there was some research done on what's called playing hard to get. I'm sure you know what it is. And it didn't go very far. There weren't many studies on it. And in about 2010, maybe 2009, I started thinking about it more, maybe even before that, if I'm honest. And I said, okay, maybe we can understand playing hard to get as an economically driven behavior, right? That it's about supply and demand. And so we're giving an old thing, right? A kind of behavioral economics, which didn't really exist at the time, look at this thing. So that's number two. So we have this idea of looking at old things in a new way and looking at new things in an old way, right? Old, new, old, all that kind of stuff, right? Another one for ideas can simply be having personal insight. Maybe you have experience that allows you to say something unique that people weren't saying in the past, right? And so, for instance, my work on the dark triad is partially a function of this. So I think of myself as a little bit narcissistic. I mean, if you know me, I like to dress well. I like to be a dominant member of a social group. Not the kind of negative narcissism that everybody ascribes to the term, but narcissism is a more nuanced thing. And so my mentor at the time and I were talking about, could narcissism be useful, right? Be adaptive. Goes back to the, taking an old idea and looking at it in a new way kind of thing, because people have been studying narcissism for decades. But I had some personal insight here, and I used that personal insight to build, an empire around the dark triad, of course. And so you might have personal insight about dogs, or you might have personal insight about other things that I'm trying to get my own insight about fashion. I'm trying to move into this domain because of personal insight, personal stake, personal interest. And indeed, if you have a unique look at something, if you have a personal insight because of that, it can actually generate ideas, and at the very least, things you can test. Now, you might be wrong, and that should be okay, and you shouldn't be doing crappy science to validate your opinion, confirmation bias, right? But you can use your personal insight to test those intuitions, to potentially exclude them as hypotheses, or just to build a whole kind of, let's say, empire around that. Number four would be what we'll call consolidating. So in psychology, in biology, in all the fields we have, there's just so much noise, right? Every day, thousands of papers are generated. How can you reduce them? Right? As a small example, you might reduce the number of scales that exist to better understand a phenomenon like the imposter syndrome. So one of my students now is working on this, where there's several scales about imposter syndrome. And so she's trying to consolidate the noise, to reduce the noise into a more manageable package for people. And so consolidation is an approach. Indeed, we've done this with what we've talked about already about mate preferences, right? So we tried to consolidate the huge array of potential things that people study in mate preference, say, you know what, we think it really only boils down to those four things that we've already discussed. Number five, you can look to current events. Now, current events can be things like issues about abortion, it could be issues about the war, and I'm not saying you should do politically motivated research, but instead those current events might be informative of things like, why are people this way? And so in the 1960s in particular, the rise of research on racism exploded in social psychology, in part because well-meaning academics looked around the world and said, this is happening, this is something we have to deal with, right? We should study this. And so ever since then, that's a lot of what social psychology has become, trying to understand and reduce race-based or gender-based, etc., kind of biases that they see in the world. And number six, you can just simply be curious about your day-to-day life. You could, when you walk around the world, you see things happening. You say, why do people do that? So I'm seeing this with clothes these days a lot, because that's a lot on my mind. And I see the way people dressing very casual, as I've been describing it in my Instagram, dressing like you're a teenager. And so it's like, okay, don't take this on its face value. Don't just walk away from it. Think, okay, why do people do this, right? The things you see in the world are artifacts of what's going on in people's brains. And so if you care about people's motivations or internal systems, you say, okay, why do people dress this way? Why does Peter dress this way, right? And you could ask yourself, why do I dress this way even? A level of introspection might even be useful. Say, okay, I think this way, I dress this way because, right? And then you can follow that up. This is that personal insight from number three. Number seven, you can court controversy, right? You can pick particular topics that are likely to generate not just publications, but response publications, new ideas, and a kind of dueling kind of process. Indeed, one of my friends and I once joked about we could create a controversy, and then he would publish on one side, and I would publish on another, and we would just have all kinds of publications as a result of just this faux controversy that we made up. Indeed, academics are really good about making mountains out of molehills, unfortunately. So, court the controversy. So, sex difference is a controversial topic. Sexual orientation is a controversial topic. And of course, if you study those things in the kind of politically correct, acceptable manner, you won't be courting controversy. You have to study them in a way that's going to get people a little bit frazzled, right? And say, oh, I don't like what he or she says, and therefore I'm going to write an angry blog post, or I'm going to do another study, and then that person does another study, and then you respond with another study. Of course, I've done some of this kind of stuff myself with things like sexual orientation and its relationship with the dark triad. Severi Luto and I did this, and this, of course, no surprise, created all kinds of a stir among people. But don't be afraid, right? Be brave. Court the controversies. A common way that people do this is they simply find gaps. And there's always little tiny gaps you can do. Find big ones, right? Little ones like, oh, well, we didn't do this study in this country. Yeah, that's not compelling. If there's something fundamentally different about this particular country versus another, let's say, then that's something you should test. And that's probably a good way to go. I've done this myself, of course. But just saying, well, we didn't study this in this population. So it's a common criticism when we present research on, say, mate preferences. Guaranteed, someone in the audience is going to say, well, what about homosexuals? And my response is always, what about them? Right? This is a gap, I agree. But unless there's a substantive reason to actually think that this other group is fundamentally different, whether it be something about them individually, about where they live, anything like that, then pursue it, of course. But minor gaps don't get you anywhere, right? Minor gaps are interesting little detours in your career, right? Indeed, I have done many of these, so this is coming from personal experience now. My research on booty call relationships was this 4 or 5 paper detour, and then it just kind of dies because it doesn't really go anywhere. Like it's interesting, it's cute, but the gap, it's small. And I just didn't know it at the time that it was a small gap. So try to find big gaps, big omissions, things that were researchers just failed to consider, like, for instance, the mechanisms that might be responsible for some social psychological effect, as an example, right? So mechanisms can be personality traits. It could be alternative moderators, right? So a lot of, say, social psychologists really don't treat sex of the participant in a reliable way, and they often treat it as a nuisance variable, and they'll factor it out statistically in their, let's say, regression analysis. But I think sex matters, and I don't mean the act of sex, of course, which I think matters, but I mean as a variable it matters, and I don't think we should treat it as a nuisance variable. We should at the very least include it as a potential moderator to exclude it as something that's valuable or not. But that's, to me, a pretty glaring omission, for example. So you might pursue that. Another one is replicate and extend. By that is a commonly taught, very straightforward process, but you might replicate and extend a study that you liked, right? And say, okay, I'm going to add another variable. This, of course, ties to the gaps issue, right? But you might say, okay, I'm going to build on something that I already saw, that I liked. And this gets us to number 10. And this is the most straightforward and common way things are done. You get inspiration from other academics. How do you do that? Well, one way you do that is simply you go to your mentor. Your mentor will tell you oftentimes what to do because he or she has some idea of the right approach to take. Students often don't have enough knowledge to pick good topics that will go anywhere, topics that will pay off, for example. So your mentor is a good source to go to at first. Indeed, sometimes your mentor will have a grant, and whatever your PhD on is basically already stipulated. And so you, in essence, must do it. An alternative and slightly, a shade away from that would be to go to academic conferences. Interact with other academics, especially young academics who are hungry, who are publishing. Conferences, as I've gotten older now, I now more and more feel that conferences are really about places for young people, right? They're places for young people to network, to present their research, to build their CVs. Going to a conference now for me has almost no upside other than maybe seeing my friend, maybe seeing a new city. So for me, a conference that's not in a cool place, I can't be bothered. So if it's in a place I like Vienna, as we say in Polish, idziemy, let's go. If it's a place that I'm uninterested in, like some podunk town in Denmark or something, I'm probably not going to go. But for young people, go. Network, meet new professors, meet new students, build collaborations. Those collaborations can generate new study ideas, can generate publications, because the game is, in a lot of ways, about generating publications. And the better, and in particular, better quality ones. And the better quality ones come from better ideas. So all 10 of these things should help you generate better ideas to produce better publications, to get more grant money, to get better jobs. And as much as we like to think of academics being this kind of monk-like, austere kind of career, no, it's a business, and it's more and more now a business than it's ever been. So hopefully these 10 ideas will have given you some inspiration. Thanks for bearing with me for all this time that I've been away, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it's been. I'll try to come back to you soon with some more stuff that I'm working on. And obviously, like, follow, share, all that kind of wonderful stuff. All right? See ya.